So one of the main questions that I always get is, how do I set up my microphone for recording, especially in a bedroom situation when you don't have a booth? So obviously there's some problems that can occur. There's all different types of microphones, and we can reference some other lessons for the different types of microphones. There's dynamics, there's condensers. You want to choose the microphone based off of the situation and whatever your need is. But regardless of the type of microphone that you choose, there's still some tips and some tricks that can help you get a better recording in your bedroom. One of the first things that you want to do is to make sure that you have the microphone at the correct height. You want to make sure that the diaphragm is right in front of the person's mouth, and you want to make sure that you at least have some type of way of stopping the P's and the S's coming out of a person's voice. We also want to place this about 3 to 4 inches away from the microphone so that we have enough space for that to occur. One of the other things that we want to think about is neatness. I know a lot of times people don't think about that, but having cables going all over the place is never a great thing. People trip over them and they sort of get in the way. So as neat as you can be with wrapping the cable around the stand will help you in your recording. At the end of the day, when you're problem solving and when you're running into situations where you don't know what's going on, the neatness of how you have your microphone cables really makes a difference. The main concern that we're going to have to deal with, and most people have to deal with when recording in an open space, is the reverb, or should I say ambient sound that can occur because we're in such an open room. So the first thing that I would suggest would be to put a rug underneath of the mic stand. This not only helps us to deaden the sound, it also protects us against direct reflections coming off of the floor, and it gets to tame some of the noise that you get from people's feet moving around and from the stand itself moving around. Now that we've dealt with the problem of the floor, the next suggestion that I would give would be to put a piece of egg crate behind us on the wall. What that does is allow us to tame the frequencies that will be bouncing off of the wall, hitting our microphone, and in essence creating what we call flutter. We don't want that. We want to tame that sound, so the best way to do that would be to put a piece of egg crate. I would say only 1 block will do. Again, we don't need to do the whole wall. It's just the area that's directly behind us to absorb some of that sound. You would be amazed at the results that you would get from this small piece. My next suggestion would be to move the microphone a little bit closer to the wall. You don't need to have so much space. What we're trying to do is to emulate the sound of a booth. We want a nice close space. We can add reverb later to our taste, but we want to make this signal as dry as possible. So pulling the microphone closer will give us a drier signal. The only thing that we have to worry about is something that we call proximity effect. That means that the closer that you get to the microphone, the more bass that will come in your signal. So you want to keep in mind that you don't want that much proximity effect, but you want to get the microphone as close as possible to get a nice strong signal. We can cut off some of the sound with the direction of the mic. We have different polar patterns on different microphones, but we still want to make sure that we eliminate the rest of the sound coming from the room. So a reflection filter would be the best choice. So as you can see, we've set up our filter. And just from the visual, you can see how much this cuts off the rest of the room. Hopefully, when I speak into the microphone, you can hear the complete difference from when we had a completely open room. One of the keys to this, though, and I'll turn this around so that you can see it, is that we need to place the microphone directly inside of the reflection filter. A lot of times I see people that get these and they pull the microphone out too far, which is sort of defeating the purpose. This is a major point when using this, because if you use this correctly, along with our rug and our crate that we will put on the back of the wall, we're getting as close as we can to emulating the sound of the booth, where we're keeping our sound as dry as possible. Again, we can add reverb later, but we want to capture the sound as dry as possible on the input. Now, one of the things that I did want to show you and actually demonstrate so that you can hear it is the difference with this off and on. So before I finish putting this reflector filter on, I at least wanted you to hear my voice in this open space. What I'll do now is I'll put it on, I'll keep talking so that you can hear what this is actually doing to our signal. It's very simple. I just place this in here. I'll make sure that my height is correct. I'll tighten accordingly. And now hopefully you can hear the difference of what it sounds like when you're trying to emulate the sound of the booth.
My name is Taylor G, and I am a professional guitarist endorsed with Fender Musical Instruments. My love for guitar began at the age of 11 and has brought me to screens and stages alike, performing with artists such as Stevie Wonder, Ari Lennox, Victoria Monet, and more. So let's get started with the parts of the guitar. Now first we have our body, then we're going to move to the parts on the neck, and then I'm going to talk about the parts on the headstock. So let's get started on the body. So these are our pickups. They transmit a current to the amp and give you sound. This bad boy is our bridge. It transmits the strings vibrations into another part of the guitar, also giving you sound. So let's move on to these knobs. We have 2 tone knobs, which control the frequency in which you're hearing the guitar. We have a higher pitched one and a lower pitched one. So if I were to turn one down, then I lose my high frequency. Now if I turn this back up and I turn this one down, then I lose more low frequency. So you want to make sure that it's set in a way to where you're comfortable with what you hear tone-wise. Okay, and of course, we have our volume knob, in which that, of course, gives us volume. If I turn it down, nothing. Turn it back up, sound. This is our toggle switch, which activates 1 or 2 of the pickups depending on where it's placed. Now we have it in first position, which is our bridge pickup. So let's hear how that sounds. All right, so that's back here. Now I'll put it in second position, third position, fourth position, and fifth position. Notice how it got brighter and brighter. So we started here and then we're left with this one. Okay. Now we're gonna go to the neck of the guitar. Now this is the long, thin piece of wood between the headstock and the body. So let's go over its parts. We have the strings, of course. Now the strings is what we use to actually emit sound. The wires from the string vibrate in such a way that they give you what's called a pitch. So technically each string has a different sound. Now I know you're wondering, what are these metal wirings dividing the neck? These are called our frets. And what they do is they divide the neck in such a way that we're able to play different notes. So when I put my finger down on the first fret, I get one note. If I put it down on another fret, I get a different note. And so on. These little dots here are called design markers. And what they do is they help you to know what position you're placing your fingers in. So for example, if I were to place my finger here, this would be on the 3rd fret. This is our 5th fret, our 7th, our 9th, our 12th, and so on. So I'm never lost. This here is the nut. And what it is a hard piece of material that helps support the strings right before the headstock. All right, now let's move on to the headstock. We have our tuning pegs, and basically what these do is they loosen and tighten the strings to help us be able to keep the strings in tune. This right here is our string tree, and basically what it does is it holds the strings in a downward position to be able to provide us with accurate tuning.
GarageBand is an incredible tool for all musicians because it allows you to create high quality music, and having that kind of power is a game changer. My name is Mike. I am a full-time musician and music instructor from the UK. No matter who or where you are, you can create incredible pieces of music. Next, we're going to look at our virtual keyboard. So to find that, we're going to come to plus, and here's our keyboard. So you can see at the bottom here, we've got Smart Piano, Alchemy Synth, and Sampler. Now we're going to come to each of these individually, but first let's just tap on the keyboard and it should bring up something like this. So it may sound really obvious, but to play this, we're just going to press down with our fingers. To change the sound of our keyboard, we just got to press up here, and we've got tons of different sounds, loads of cool like organs, electric pianos, and we've got loads of synths over here which we're going to look at in a sec. So let's start with our classic grand, because that was a good place to start. So over here to the left, we've got our octave selector. So it's going to just take us down the octave or further down the piano. We can go even further, and equally we can go up, and another one up, but it does stop at about 4. And then we've got our sustain toggle here, so we can switch that on, and this is going to sustain those notes for us. Or if you'd like a bit more control over your sustain, Once you press it down, it's going to sustain, and whenever you take it off, it's going to act like a piano pedal would, and we can get a bit more control over our sustain that way. This next button here gives us a couple different options for our keyboard. So this is really cool. We can select like a double keyboard if you want to play like this. I'm not much of a keyboard player, as you can probably tell. You can also change how many keys are displayed, so it might be a bit easier on this setting where the keys are a bit bigger. But if you're an absolute madman and you want to go for a setup like this, you can do that too. Although I don't know how you do that because they're so tiny. So let's just go back to our standard sort of view, and I'm going to change it to the nice thick ones so it's nice and easy. So we have a couple different options here as well. We've got our velocity controls. So once we switch that on, you'll notice that this pops up on the left. So this is going to give us more control over the velocity of the instrument. So if we tap it nice and gently, it's going to make a quieter note. But if we tap it harder, it's going to make a louder note. So this is really good, but it can be quite easy to accidentally tap a bit too hard because it's not quite as good as playing on a real keyboard. So we can select the velocity we want to work within. So if you want it to be quite quiet, we can take the top end right down, and it's going to be more controlled in the sort of mid zone. But equally, if we want to make every note really loud, we can bring it up like this. So you can just, narrow down the kind of playing you want to achieve. And then we have our key controls. So once we switch that on, you're going to see here, it's going to give us some different options as to how we move up and down the keyboard. So in glissando, we're going to just be static. But if we press it again, it's going to go on to scroll. Now we can move the keyboard up and down manually, and you can see there where we are on the keyboard. Next here we have our arpeggiator. Let's turn that on and see what that does. So what an arpeggiator does, is going to play the notes that we have pressed down. It's going to match it to the tempo of our song, and it sounds a little bit like this. How cool, right? And this can be as complex or as simple as you want. So we can do a load of things to change how that arpeggiator works. If we press on that again, you can see we've got some options here. So we can change the note order. We can have the notes play as I've played them. So if I go up here first, and then down here, and then in the middle, it's going to play them in the order that I've pressed. But if I want them to just go up, I can select that here, and then no matter what order I press them down on, the notes are always going to ascend up. Equally, I can go down. It can go up and then down. Or we can make it random, which gives us a really cool sort of varied riff. Awesome. So I'm going to leave it on as played for now. And then we can also change the note rate. So this is just basically how quickly those notes are being played. And then 132, which is going to be crazy. We've got dotted, so this is just going to be a bit varied. And then we've got triplets. And lastly, we've got our octave range. So you may have noticed, as I was playing there, it wasn't only playing the notes I've pressed down, it also plays them in an octave above. So we can change how many octaves our arpeggiator runs through here. So the minute it's on 2, if I select 1, it's going to be really clear what I'm pressing down. And then if I want to make it 2 octaves, make it 3, 4. So one last thing about the arpeggiator, if we have it on, you'll see there's a latch control over here. So if we switch that on and then play our arpeggiator, it's going to lock in place once we press the notes down. So that means that I can just press over here or press down over there, and it's going to play it for me hands-free. And once we say play a chord in, so like this, it's going to loop round, and then I can change the pitch of that chord by just pressing one note at a time. So you see the chords become lower. So we can play around with the pitch of that chord. So you may have noticed when I was switching around the keyboard sounds earlier that there's a couple different options when we click on some different pianos. So you can see here on this electric piano, we've got a pitch control and we've got some awesome effects over here. So like I said earlier, there's going to be tons of effects on these virtual instruments. Just have a really good play around with them. There's really no right or wrong answer to a lot of these effects. They're purely just to add like character to the instrument that's being played. And the best way of finding out what each effect does is just to turn it right up. Don't be afraid to experiment. There's really, like I said earlier, no right or wrong. And it's just about having fun as well. I think you'll often come up with cool little riffs and cool little ideas just from playing around with the effects and having fun with it. So that's going to be a bit different on every kind of instrument we select. Apart from sort of more traditional sounding keyboard sounds, we've also got our Alchemy synth. So these are going to give us a load of different effects and options to muck around with. So as you can see here, the screen looks a little bit different. So we've got a pitch and a modifier. And then we've got some different preset effects here. So I can just move this blue box around and you can see over here, depending on where I move them, it's just going to change all those effects for us. So it makes it nice and simple rather than just have to play with all those dials. So in this one keyboard sound alone, we've got tons of cool effects there. Now, if you wanted to go a bit more in depth into controlling those effects, you can slide over that top screen and you can get into the nitty-gritty with all these controls. And it's worth noting on our Alchemy synth and with a couple of other different keyboard sounds, we have another option here now. So we've got our glissando, our scroll, and we've also got pitch. So with this, we can basically use it almost like a chaos pad or a touch pad. Let me go back to one of the more basic sounds. You can see that blue dot. As we move it up and down, it's going to change the pitch of the note. And we can do this with multiple fingers and create some really cool stuff like that. So you may have noticed when we switched to our Alchemy synth, it's brought us up another button here. Now if we press that, you notice our sort of square selector effecty thing is going to go into the middle. Now what we can do with this is move our device around and it's going to change what effects being used or what presets being used. So if I play a chord and then move the iPad around, that effect preset is going to change. So yeah, how cool is that? We can literally move our iPad around to make some cool sounds. So yeah, there's loads of cool things to be playing around with here. Have a good experiment and just have a good bit of fun.